We're on. Okay. All right, so our next chapter, chapter 10, is on Romanticism and New England Renaissance. We're talking about Ralph Waldo Emerson. And so we're talking about, he was born in 1803, and he began working as a preacher. And he lost his wife, and it plunged him into a crisis of faith. He became a widower. And so he was already kind of weakened by a Unitarian Universalism perspective, and he decided to resign his ministry. So he was born in 1803. He resigned his ministry in 1832. So he was still a very young man. He abandoned any semblance of theism, and he really focused on nature, and that's what provided him lots of comfort and direction. But he had an ambient viewpoint toward nature. He loved and respected nature, but to him, nature was all-powerful and relevant, and his faith ultimately strayed into pantheism. And remember, pantheism argues that God is alive everywhere, in tangible things and inanimate objects as well. There's nothing new. So, likeness of Emerson's pantheism was is very common in the Bible as well. Like when the prophets of Baal that Elijah attacked, was very similar to Emerson's transcendentalism. So here it is, the 1830s, and we're looking at Ralph Waldo Emerson's. He was a failure at farming and at pasturing now, but Unitarianism was a haven for his injured soul. And so he wrote, you've got to remember the things in perspective of, like, he was a pastor, but he had, he's been wounded emotionally by losing his wife at such a young age, and he's finding comfort in nature. And so we're going to listen to The Snowstorm.
The Snowstorm by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Announced by all the trumpets of the sky, arrives the snow, and driving along the fields seems nowhere to alight. The whited air hides hills and woods, the river and the heaven, and veils the farmhouse at the garden's end. The sled and travellers stopped, the courier's feet delayed, all friends shut out, the housemaids sit around the radiant fireplace, enclosed in a tumultuous privacy of storm. Come see the north wind's masonry, out of an unseen quarry evermore, furnished with tile, the fierce artificer curves his white bastions with projected roof round every windward stake, or tree, or door, speeding and myriad-handed, his wild work so fanciful, so savage, naught cares he for number or proportion. Mockingly, on coop or kennel, he hangs Parian wreaths. A swan-like form invests the hidden thorn, fills up the farmer's lane from wall to wall. Maugre the farmer's sighs, and at the gate a tapering turret overtops the work. And when his hours are numbered, and the world is all his own, retiring as he went up, leaves when the sun appears, astonished art to mimic in slow structures, stone by stone, built in an age, the mad wind's night work, the frolic architecture of the snow.
Okay. So that's one of his famous poems. And then we're also going to watch a video about him and his life in Concord, Massachusetts.
Up next, we visit the study study of writer Ralph Waldo Emerson.
We're in Emerson's study as it was recreated across the road from Emerson's house in Concord. It's now in the Concord Museum. In 1930, when this building was built, the family made a determination that one, the study was the heart of the house. There were already a number of people coming to Concord just to look at the study. Even while Emerson was alive, they would come up to the front door just to look at him sitting in his study. And there was more demand to see it than they were going to fulfill. This was the moment when the Ralph Waldo Emerson Memorial Association was formed. So they decided to send, as long as this new building was, this new fireproof building was being built across the street, they decided to send the study over there. So the plans for this building were modified a little bit in order to reproduce the study exactly, its ceiling height, its dimensions, everything is exactly as it is in the original. All the items in the study were sent over, and all the items in the study were those that were there at the time of Emerson's death. There's a photograph of 1879 of Emerson sitting in that chair. You can see that the study is exactly as it was. Emerson was born in Boston in 1803, but he was the grandson of William Emerson, the minister, Concord's minister, in the late 1760s, early 1770s, and Emerson was very aware of that heritage. He went to Harvard, then went to Harvard Divinity School, and was in the pulpit of Boston's Second Parish for some years. So he was a minister. He was trained as a minister, but he left the pulpit. He had some difficulties with the doctrines, and he wanted to move on. And just at that moment, there were new opportunities arising with the Lyceum movement, where someone could go and speak and get paid for it. And he started doing that, and he started publishing, and those things worked out for him. Emerson married in 1829, but his wife didn't live for long, and so he first visited Europe, and then when he came back, he moved to Concord. So in 1834, the family's house was still there, so Emerson came back and stayed at the manse for a year, and that's when he wrote his essay, Nature. It's certainly his first secular publication, his first transcendentalist publication. It's really the properly given credit as being the sort of first transcendentalist manifesto in America, which kind of hit like a bombshell, and it actually made him internationally known, and kind of set him up for life for his career as a public intellectual, as a speaker, as a writer. Concord was a farming town, about 100 farms of 60 acres each, right through that period. But there were also, because the courts met in Concord, there were some lawyers in town too. So there was a bit of range there, a little bit of manufacturing in Concord, and Emerson knew everybody. There were only about 1,500, 1,800 people in town, and Emerson knew everybody, and was much admired for his burgeoning reputation. He didn't have ups and downs. His reputation was going up his whole life. Emerson made an effort to gather thinkers around him. He may even have had aspirations for a sort of loosely organized commune of sorts. He loved to converse with searching, intelligent people, and he would bring them around him. Bronson Alcott is a good example. Henry Thoreau is a good example. Thoreau was a protege of Emerson's, and it was deliberate. Emerson was always on the lookout for America's poet. He knew he was out there, and this idea of an original American voice was very important to Emerson, and he himself was an original American voice, but he wanted more. And so ultimately, you find that in Emerson's study, you would have gatherings that could include on any given night Emerson and Thoreau and Bronson Alcott and Nathaniel Hawthorne and Margaret Fuller and who knows who else happened to be around. Students from Harvard who came out, they would join the conversation. And that conversation, which was really Margaret Fuller's great art and Bronson Alcott's great art, the conversations, Alcott says, no man may record. They just flew. Emerson's children were frequent visitors to the study, and then also Louisa May Alcott, when she was young, was given the great privilege of making use of the study, and it meant a great deal to her. So you can imagine a very young Louisa May Alcott reading Plato in Shakespeare's study. So it really happened. His last international trip was 1873. There was a fire in the house, and Ellen, his daughter, took him to Egypt so that the house could be rebuilt. And that's what we see in the study now is the post-1873 study. And Lydia and Edith Emerson, his daughter, were responsible for the renovations in the house. So we came back to a sort of new house, but then his career sort of slowed off from there, and he died in 1883. That was kind of monumental. That was a very big deal. Not unexpected, so not tragic. He was 80 years old, but it was attended with all of the passing of an era kind of rhetoric that you would expect. Quite different from Thoreau's death in 1862, which was tragic. He was only 44, nearly 45, and for the local circle of intellectuals, Thoreau was as prominent as Emerson. Thoreau didn't have Emerson's national and international reputation, but everybody around here knew who Thoreau was, and that he was in many ways a real intellectual peer to Emerson. So his passing was tragic. Emerson's was nostalgic in a way. Emerson is central to the literary history of Concord, both because of the prominence of his writings, the subjects of his writings, but also because of those deliberate efforts he made to organize higher thought in America, particularly in the 1840s and 50s. He was an activist intellectual because the study survived so essentially intact, and that was deliberate. That was Ellen's work. She wanted it to stay the way he left it, and that's a sort of privilege and a responsibility that we want to live up to. And as long as it's still the same as it was, we'll just try and keep it the same as it was.
Okay. Think about what was going on in his lifetime in American history. Do you know? You remember? Because so much literature is tied to history. Think about 1830 to 1880.
Wasn't one of the world wars going on?
Not the World War, but we were headed into Civil War. Remember 1850, you had the Slavery Fugitive Act, where it was an anti-slave act, and so that was starting to stir things up between the North and the South. In the 1830s, you had the whole Indian Removal Act and the Trail of Tears, and you had all of that going on. So it was a very emotional century of the mistreatment of so many people. So, any questions or thoughts on Ralph Waldo Emerson? That's who you're going to be studying this week. We are limited on how many books and stories that we're going to read, but we have to cover as much as possible in prep for the Clerk exam. So some books you're only going to be assigned to read the lit charts, and these are going to be provided. So on the teacher class grade link page, I've already put out one of them. So who was Louisa May Alcott that they talked about in the video? Does anybody remember what she wrote?
Was it his daughter?
No, but she wrote something very famous, and we get to read the lit chart on it. And you're going to love it. They made a movie, a remake of the movie.
Oh, Little Women.
Little Women, that's right.
Little Women.
Little
I love
Women.
the newest version. The newest version is my favorite.
So she wrote Little Women, and so we're not going to have time to read that whole book, so we're just going to have to study the lit chart for it. So definitely be sure you're familiar with that. Are you quizzing yourself on your literary terms and your glossary? Pages 540 through 542. There's a Jeopardy game listed in your grade link assignments that you can play. Can everybody access that to practice? And remember, it's going to be a matching test. You're going to have to match the words with the definitions. Make sure you read his poetry this week and complete the warm-up assignments that it gives you. Read lesson 2, the poem Day on page 175. Complete the warm-up. Type your response to the question and bring it in next week for a grade. It should be 150 to 200 words in MLA formatting. Read lesson 5, Spiritual War, on pages 182 to 183. Be prepared for a class discussion on these topics next week. Complete the Concept Builder 10E on a separate sheet of paper. And next week, you're going to take an in-class quiz where you have to answer an essay. And it's how did Americans view themselves in transcendentalism, and how did that contrast to Puritanism? And you need to think of poems that will support your claim. So, and that exact same information is on your grade link assignments. So, but it'll be an in-class essay grade. In preparation for reading Thoreau, you could watch the Political Theory Henry David Thoreau video that's on the link in the teacher class grade link page as well. Finalize your essay. It's due in 2 weeks. Your final version. Modern States 4.6 and the homework questions. You've got to email me the SNP of your homework score. Make sure when you take your SNP, it says 4 up there in it somewhere, so I know that belongs to Module 4. The check for understanding SNP of your scores. You're reading your Chapter 3 in your CLEP book, and you're using the link on the Little Women Lit Chart PDF page. You're going to start reading the information about the book. So, lots to do next week. I got it. Let me cut off the camera.